I want to talk to you about making work your happy place. That might sound quite outlandish, but we all certainly don't want our work to be our unhappy place. So who am I? I'm Nick Marks. I'm a statistician by trade, but I also trained as a therapist when I was young. My mother was a family therapist, so it interested me. So perhaps it's not surprising that I've become the guy that does data about people and their experience of life. So I've done a TED talk on my previous work, which was about how governments measure well-being. But since that time, I've been thinking about work. We spend a lot of time at work. So if we're interested in adults' positive mental health, their happiness, then work is a great place to think about as we spend so much time there. Now, what are emotions for? Happiness is an emotion. Neuroscientists such as Antonio Damasio talk about emotions as having three functions. So they help us monitor our environment. Are we a good fit for where we are? When we're happy, we're in a good place. They also help motivate us, that all of our emotions are really linked to how we behave in the world. That's why it's called emotion, move outs. And finally, they help us adjust what's going on, so we're able to change our direction where we need to. Now, happiness is what we tend to call a positive emotion. Psychologists talk about negative and positive emotions. Negative emotions are not dysfunctional. They're about responding to threats to our well-being. So classically, an emotion like anger or fear is part of the fight and flight mechanism. You know, when we're angry, someone's kind of overstepped a mark. It feels like there's an injustice, and we want to respond to that. When we're frightened, there's something happening to us that we want to move away, run away, freeze. An emotion like sadness is more complex, but it's about a loss of a support system. But happiness is a very broad emotion. If I ask people, what does happiness mean to you? Some people will say contentment, which is a very low energy, tranquility, serenity in those sort of areas. But other people will say it's about joy, enthusiasm. And so those are emotions where we're sort of really bursting with energy. So they're very different. And really there's a whole array of positive emotions. We can think of ones like curiosity, where we're exploring the world. Interest, where we're really focusing on what we're doing. Amusement, laughter, where we're sort of hanging out with people and sort of bonding. And in fact, some team leaders, they get worried about happiness at work because they start thinking, wow, if people are happy, not really going to be working, are they? And I think they're really focusing on that sort of amusement, laughter part of happiness. When actually, if you look at the data, we are slightly turning down our cognitive functioning. It doesn't pay us to be our most brilliant selves, most confrontational selves, when we're trying to belong to a group. So we turn that down. Now, in a team, you want people to get on well. That helps collaboration, creativity, all sorts of things. But you also want people to be really focused on their work, sometimes to have differing opinions, because out of that creative tension comes new ideas. So you really want your teams to explore this whole array of positive emotions. Sort of have an emotional agility. At times, you know, have your headphones on and be really focused. At other times, be in a room with other people laughing because you're building those relationships that you need. So if you're going to build a happier team, you're going to build back better after COVID, then this is the sort of space I think that people want in their work. This is building your happy place at work. But how do we do that? Well, Aristotle talked about how excellence was a habit. And I think happiness is a habit. Positivity is a habit. You've got to get it into your weekly workflow. So in your teams, I think you should meet every week. You should ask people, how was last week? Were you unhappy? Were you happy? What's gone well for you? So often at work, we just go to the next challenge. We don't stop and take time to notice what we've done well and what our colleagues have done well. Shout them out. Call it out. Notice who we appreciate. You know, relationships are massively important at work, well, in our whole lives, actually. So appreciating other people, tell them, thank them. Really important. But also give space for people to surface their frustrations, any concerns, anything they're stuck on. In tech teams, they often call this a retrospective, where they try and pick up on where the friction is in their team, where the flow is. And building a happy place at work is really about team flow, getting rid of the frustrations and helping people be their best selves at work. Now, I'm a statistician, so I kind of want data on this. And if we go back to that first point of Antonio Damasio, that emotions are a signal whether we're a good fit, it's monitoring our environment. You can ask people every week in a pulse survey about how happy they were this week, from very unhappy to very happy. You can turn those feelings into data. And when you have that data, you can start to see time trends. You can start to see differences between teams. Now, COVID is not an experiment that any of us would want it to have gone through. But with a huge global pandemic affecting everybody at the same time, it does produce interesting data. And we've seen all sorts of data about the pandemic. We've seen cases, we've seen hospitalizations, deaths, R values, exponential growth. It's all been there. But I bet most of you haven't seen the impact of COVID on people's weekly experience. It does exist, this data, certainly in the UK. I saw this graph in the World Happiness Report, which came out in March this year. And what it shows is the impact on workers' happiness in the UK. And what you see is in January, February, the graph going along as normal, and then a huge dip in March. It dropped 33% in the UK, which, and this is an overused word, but is unprecedented. Normally we see a small seasonal effects, but not a huge drop like this. But it was a genuinely scary time last March for everybody. It increased anxiety for most of the population. We then see a coming back. Over the summer of 2020, the UK started to open up again, maybe a bit too quickly and unwisely, because we saw further dips, further rises in COVID cases in the autumn, which led to another dip in happiness, mainly driven by boredom and frustration in the autumn. Now, this data was published in the World Happiness Report, but the raw data actually comes from a group called YouGov in the UK, who are a polling agency, and they release the data every week on their website. So I'm able to extend the graph right through to the end of the summer 2021. This is the same data. I've just done it here for white-collar workers, and I'll explain why in a minute. But you see the same curve, the dip in March, the rise, the fall again. You then see a blip at Christmas up. Even though we were locked down at Christmas, people were happier. And then we see it falling down again in January and March. The times that I actually found the hardest was the beginning of this year. And then rising back towards it. Now, when I saw this data, I thought, oh God, this is a great benchmark for our clients, because we ask a very similar question every week to our clients. So what I've done is I've overlaid the data here. I've equalized their starting points. It was difficult to know how the levels level up. My hunch is that our clients are much happier than the UK population, but the shape of the curve is what I want to show you. And you see the same dip in March 2020. But you see a smaller dip for our clients, and you also see them getting back towards where they were much more quickly. That is resilience in action. Resilience is the shape of the curve when you measure experience weekly. You see the bounce back. But there's another form of resilience, which is absorption, which is keeping out the shock. And if you look at the second and third waves, our clients didn't have them. They had the same peak at Christmas, but not the second and third waves. And I think what they were really good was making work their happy place for their employees, at least keeping the unhappiness of COVID outside. What a service to their employees that they managed to do. And of course our clients were doing the same sort of thing that Damasio talks about. They were monitoring every week. They were meeting every week to talk about their data, and they were responding to it. They were adjusting their behaviors. And why did they bother? Because happiness is great for business, which is when you have a happy team, you have a productive team. We know that happier teams are 28% more productive. It does depend on the type of work you do, but it's a massive increase in productivity. We know they have better retention of their staff and their talent. And you know, retention or absenteeism and loss of employees cost businesses a lot of money. But then there are also subtler effects like creativity, is that when you get on with your teammates, you're much more able to bounce ideas off with each other. And there's had to be a lot of innovation during COVID, not only about what we do in work, but how we work. And the teams that trust each other more and work well together have been able to do that much better. And if you lead a team, then also there's this amazing advantage that happier teams have less conflict and less stress. So as a team leader, it makes your work a much happier place. And it makes you a much more liked, even loved boss, because your employees, your team, are going to love it that you care about their weekly experience. And if you put this all together, you really do start to make people's work their happy place. Now, not only do we need that sort of weekly flow of people talking about things, Aristotle talked about how excellence was a habit and happiness is a habit, so you need that weekly experience. But you also need to have clues about what are the deeper drivers of people's positive experience at work. And if we go back to that sort of emotional array, where we got contentment, satisfaction, if you like, enjoyment, enthusiasm, curiosity and interest, and joy, even awe, then really they line up to 5 great energies. So when we're talking about the amusement, laughter one, we're talking about connecting. When we're talking about contentment, we're really talking about things feeling fair and just. When we're talking about enthusiasm, we're people being empowered to do their work. Curiosity and interest, they're challenged, they're stretched. And when they're really enjoying their work and they feel inspired to do the work. And those 5 things, connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire, are what we also do at Friday Pulse once a quarter, where we do a deeper dive. We call it a culture profile, so you're basically understanding how the culture of your team and your organisation is doing. And you put those 2 things together, the weekly check-in, the quarterly check-up, you've got a great system for your teams, your team leaders, your HR, your organisation to get really aligned. Because if you get alignment between individuals in a team, teams and the organisation, then boom, that's where the magic is in business. That's where things go really well, where you can deal with external threats, where you can keep the stresses of COVID out, you can respond to what's happening in your market, and you can build happy, highly productive teams. So I genuinely think we can make work our happy place. We can build happier teams. And I've designed Friday Pulse as a way of doing that. And if you want to find out more, well, we've got some things you can do. You can go to our website, you can download a paper on why happiness is a great KPI for business. You can go to a website called friday1.com and you can do your own personal checkup about your happiness at work, which will benchmark you against similar people. Or you could even go and use our product itself, fridaypulse.com. Anyway, as we all come out of the pandemic, hopefully we're coming out of the pandemic, let's build back better. Let's make teams a great place to work and make your work your happy place. Conferences like the Global Impact Conference are great for getting people to think differently about how the future can be. And we will all create the future together. So reflect on your own life, reflect on how you use your power in the world, whether it's your vote, what you do with your work, whether it's what you do in your communities. And it's a great opportunity for us over the next 10, 30 years to build a better world where good lives don't cost the earth, where people have good work that they enjoy, and that people lead lives that they're happy with.